Hey everybody, it's Dr. Sarah Gottfried. I've got Pedram Shojai here. Hello, Dr. Shojai.
Hello, hello. How are you?
I'm so good. And we are talking about sugar today. Sugar. And there's a study, Pedram, that I know you know about, the Oreo study, that showed that Oreos are like crack. You know, the US has the most popular cookie ever, the Oreo, and it turns out that it lights up the part of the brain where heart addictions get lit up, like crack and heroin. So, Pedram, you saw this study. What'd you think?
You know, I always knew that sugar was addictive, but when you start looking at 10 times as addictive as, say, cocaine, all of a sudden it just starts lighting up the brain like a Christmas tree. It kind of stunned me. Like I knew it was bad, I didn't know how bad it was. And you start thinking about just how prolific this is. I mean, everywhere you go, it's sugar. Our entire culture is just submerged in the sea of sugar, and you wonder why people are having all the problems they're having.
It's so true. You know, we've got this long history of thinking about food addiction or sugar addiction as being a soft addiction, that it's not quite as serious as having an addiction to heroin or crack. And this is part of that data that's starting to convince us otherwise, that this is a hard addiction and we need to treat it that way. We need to take it that seriously. And we need to pull it out. And I thought it might be helpful for our listeners to just go through some of the ways that sugar addiction shows up in your life in our very special Mars and Venus way. What do you think, Pedram?
Let's do it.
All right. So I'll kick us off. Is that all right?
Ladies first.
All right. So for women, what I would say is that you notice that you're craving a certain something. And what we know is that your willpower erodes over the course of the day. So what I hear from most of the women I work with is that they have to have some chocolate in the afternoon, you know, say 2 to 4 p.m. Another place that it shows up is that you're craving a glass of wine or a cocktail come cocktail hour. So that might be 6 p.m. You might be saying to yourself, it's 6 p.m. somewhere. Maybe you're saying it even earlier. Those are signs of sugar addiction.
I'd say for guys that have to start with anger.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, when you find yourself starting to get pissed off at the guy who merged into your lane, you start getting yourself pissed off at just every little thing that happens and kind of grumbling at people at the office and being that person, chances are your blood sugar has tanked and your mood has now become foul, and because your blood sugar levels are just so often dysregulated that it's profoundly affecting your mood. I mean, this right here can save marriages, guys. I mean, people who have really bad blood sugar balancing issues get into these bouts with their spouses and treat their children horribly and all kinds of nasty things I see every day clinically. And it's just like, dude, you're hungry. You know what I mean? Like you need to eat some food, and that, you know, and you know, right now I know Snickers is kind of jacking this in the media, and you know, they have this really funny campaign of, you know, these people who are just not themselves, right? And so this guy is acting like Betty White, and is Betty White acting in, and all of a sudden he gets back to himself because someone handed him a Snickers bar. And it's really funny because it's true that their blood sugar has tanked, but what they're not giving you in the other half of that equation is the fact that you've just taken a really high level of sugar that's going to keep you on this roller coaster in perpetuity, really.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I want to broaden this for the ladies in the audience, because just as men have issues with anger, and we've got these suggestions to keep you out of divorce court, I would say on the female side of things, irritability. So sugar addiction can definitely show up as irritability, especially if you are suffering from premenstrual syndrome. So one of the things that I found when I was researching my book is that women with PMS consume 275% more refined carbohydrates in the week before their period than women who don't have PMS. Now, I think that's stunning. That's a lot of cupcakes. So we got to turn that around. A lot of people think of PMS as being, you know, something that you can't really manage. You just got to live with it. But it turns out if you cut out the sugar, it makes a big difference in your symptoms.
I got a question for you on that. Being that I got the genius in this realm on the show here, what's your take on taking 5-HTP in that type of scenario? Because it's a serotonin deficiency in some ways, and people are trying to supplement through a means that isn't necessarily the most efficient. Like, what do you recommend your patients for that?
Right. Well, I'm so glad you asked. And maybe we could back up a little bit just to kind of take people along that arc that you just created so beautifully. So what happens, just as you described, when you have PMS, is that there's this really interesting orchestra happening between progesterone, which is like nature's Valium, its daughter, allopregnanolone, which also calms you down, serotonin, and GABA. And you want this really nice foursome between those four mediators. But what happens is the foursome's not working so well when you have PMS. It doesn't work to just add more progesterone because there's progesterone resistance, similar to insulin resistance, where your cells become numb to insulin. But we do know that when you increase serotonin, that can really make a difference. Now, you made the point about how women with PMS, they're in this rush to stuff their mouths with cupcakes, with refined carbohydrates, and that is a misguided attempt to raise serotonin. There are better ways to raise serotonin where you get a nice even burn. You don't crash with your serotonin levels and with your blood sugar levels. So I'm a fan of 5-HTP. I find that there's definitely a subset of women with PMS who do better with taking 5-HTP, which is a precursor to serotonin. It helps you make more serotonin and more melatonin. And by the way, men have much more serotonin than women. Women have about 52% of the serotonin of men. So we need every little molecule of serotonin that we can get our hands on. Now, that being said, you got to consult with your clinician about whether 5-HTP is a good idea for you. It's an amino acid, it's a supplement. You want to be really cautious, especially if you're already taking an antidepressant or some other medication that affects your serotonin level.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. Because it's amazing what happens when our brains are asking for something and then our bodies construe that message as taking that something in with calories, and then all of a sudden you get all these extra calories brought along for the ride when all you really wanted was maybe some serotonin. And so that's it's a trap I know premenstrual women fall into relatively often, and men will also go there, right? So let's go back over to the Mars camp. Guys, there's a lot of symptoms, and so women, we could talk about irritability. For men, it kind of comes out as anger or rage or whatever it is. But what about all the other symptoms? What about those headaches that you get, right? It's like, I don't know why I got this headache. I must be stressed out. If you look at this roller coaster ride of blood sugar and adrenal taxation, what oftentimes happens with guys, and I'll see guys who don't manage their blood sugar well, are usually the same guys that end up complaining about low libido and having, low energy and all this, because there's only so much you can borrow from the bank before the bank calls in the note, right? And the adrenals will do so. And and we don't want to geek out too much on you guys, but
oh yes, we do.
But we end up doing it anyways. Here's what happens. It's basically when your cortisol levels start to get skewed, then your testosterone levels will start to go all over the place. And Sarah hangs her hat here, so this should be the Sarah Gottfried show this week, because you've really, this is really your ring of expertise. And so, but what I really want to kind of just touch into on the Mars side of this is a lot of the guys are completely oblivious of the symptoms that they're having and the food that's going into their system and how those two are related. And so if you suddenly start having kind of inflammation, or you start suddenly having headaches that come up, and you're not good at predicting how they're happening, look back to breakfast and lunch. Look back to how you've been kind of running your day. And if you find these gaps in your blood sugar and the stability of that blood sugar, there's a pretty good chance that there's a correlation.
This is such a good point, and I love it when you raise these points that are such a bridge between East and West. I definitely agree that one of the most important ways to keep your hormones in balance, whether you're male or female, is to be managing your adrenals in a way that really supports you powerfully. And what I know is that when it comes to hormone balance, like this point that you made about low T or low sex drive and low testosterone, you actually want to unlock your adrenals first. You don't want to start frosting yourself in testosterone. Similarly, with PMS, you want to unlock the adrenals first. You don't want to start frosting yourself in progesterone. It just isn't an effective strategy. So you want to work it with these control system, and these adrenals are the control system. So I'm really glad that you made that point. You know, one other point that you reminded me about, Pedram, that I think really comes up for both men and women, I'm going to be a little less Venus-y here, is that when you have sugar in your life and you're inflamed and you're addicted, as with any addiction, it keeps your life small and constricted. And you're not able to really live that bigger, fuller, best life that you maybe imagined for yourself. So I think it's important to get honest, to really get accountable about the ways that you're living smaller and you're letting your relationship to sugar cloud your judgment, give you brain fog, keep you from really putting out your gift into the world. So I would say that's another major sign of being addicted to sugar.
You know, we were mentioning it offline, and it's something that I think is kind of important enough to bring up here. Is a few weeks back, I had Dr. Mark Hyman in here, and he has this huge platform on sugar and sugar addiction. That he has a new book coming out in February, I think, and and look at that, represent. There it is, the blood sugar solution, right? Exactly. So detoxing people off of sugar, and he came up with a point that I thought was really interesting, and you and I chatted about it a little bit. Is the entire slave trade in America was really kind of based on the foundations of the sugar crop. And so it created this really kind of nasty scar in our culture, where we then became, bringing slaves over from Africa to get this new thing. I mean, people were just so into the sugar. It was like, it's an addiction, right? And so, you have all this like bland, normal food, and all of a sudden this thing called sugar pops up, and it becomes this huge industry. And it really kind of took us away from ourselves, and it turned these colonies into like these slave holding plantation things. And it just, the history of sugar in the culture of the Western Hemisphere is really nasty. And so, in a lot of ways, the slavery really hasn't been abolished, because now we've all become slaves to the cash crop that brought that mess over here in the first place. And if you are, when you're talking about addictions, you're literally talking about a form of chemical slavery that you've kind of subjected yourself to. And so for me, the thing that really gets me on this is parenting and the children asking for these things, and how we've become so complicit in allowing our children to change their neuroanatomy and change the way their brains work, because it's so accepted and normal that we just allow people to, we just allow the kids to eat sugar and these Otter Pops or whatever it is that they're eating on a daily basis. It's just pure crack, and it's negatively influencing them in ways that we don't even, we can't even quite see it, because when you and I were children, we still ate normal food for the most part before all that nasty stuff started coming in, and it's just getting worse and worse every year. So we don't even know where it's going to go, but I don't think it's pretty.
It's not pretty. We know that 1 in 2 Americans suffers with diabetes, which is that full spectrum from, just having a small muffin top to full-blown diabetes. So we know that 1 in 2 Americans is suffering, and I actually think the numbers are higher, especially when I start to look at fasting blood sugar in my own patients. And we know that the optimal range there is much narrower than once thought. So you want that fasting blood sugar to be between 70 and 85. Not 99. We want between 70 and 85. And I'm so glad you raised this point about the slavery and our shameful past with slavery, its connection to sugar plantations, and how we've internalized this. I got this hit, Pedram, and maybe you'll work with this with me, that we need to have a second abolitionist movement. And so we need to help people get off of sugar. So I feel like it's our responsibility to offer some practical tips on how to get off of sugar, what some of the supplements are that can help you, what are some of the swaps that you can do, because I think it's so much easier to move towards something than to move away from something. If you're going to take away my milk chocolate, do you have another suggestion? Give me an alternative.
Right.
So how about some practical tips?
Yeah, I love that, because at the end of the day, people don't even know what to eat when it comes to that. And I'll tell you guys, like any addiction, it's usually about a few days of a bumpy ride at most, and then all of a sudden everything normalizes. And the thing I've noticed, and before we even get into the swaps, the thing that I've noticed when people start pulling themselves off of sugar is they start to come to. Within about 3-4 days, they just feel, they don't feel like they're crawling out of their skin. They don't have these kind of bouts of mood swings and energy fluctuations that are so prevalent in a culture that's addicted to sugar. And so you'd be surprised how quickly you start feeling better when you pull off the sugar. And the problem is the thing. The taste buds, right? The tongue is...
Are you pointing to your tongue?
I'm pointing to my tongue, right? This thing is addicted to sugar in a very big way too. And so we're so used to our food being sweeter that at first it's just, you kind of got to like psychologically shift through understanding that your food is going to taste bland. But you've kind of gone through the gamut, and you've kind of purged yourself of this addiction, in my opinion, when you bite into an apple and it's the most delicious thing you've ever eaten. When natural food starts tasting delicious again, where you could taste a little bit of sweet in a vegetable dish, right? And that's where we've adapted. I mean, think about caveman, right? We'd go find some sort of tuber or something, and you'd chew through this like fibrous root just to get to like this fruit, which was maybe the size of a quarter, and it would be like the most delicious thing you ever got. I mean, jackpot back then was honeycomb, right? If you found a beehive, it was a jackpot. If not, everything else was a lot more bland, and what was sweet was a reward for us, right? So
that's so true. But the cool part here for our listeners is that your taste buds remodel pretty fast. And just as Pedram was saying, you got to get through that rocky period of getting over your addiction within typically 72 hours. Your taste buds are completely remodeled about every 2 weeks. So as you start to break that addiction in terms of the mental and the physical bonds, you're also going to find that your taste buds are right there with you. Yeah,
great point. You guys, it's like anything else, it just takes a minute, but then on the other side of that, you're that much better for it, right? And once your taste buds are remodeled, here's my challenge to you guys, is get off sugar for 21 days, and we're going to show you how, and then just once go back and eat something that you normally ate that had sugar and just taste what it tastes like. It's so overwhelming. It's like drinking battery acid or something. It's like, how did I consume this every day? And that's how far gone we are, and how numb our taste buds have gotten because they've been just oversaturated with sugar, with sweets.
Such a good point. And it reminds me of our friend Jonathan Baylor and his new book, The Calorie Myth, and how he talks about just this idea that we need to pay attention to calories is no longer relevant. It's really been disproven. If you look at our history with being fat phobic and cutting out the fat in our diet and moving away from that caveman type of diet toward eating more carbohydrates, more sugar, less fat, and how that led to the rise of the obesity epidemic and the diabetes epidemic, it doesn't work. And so he's got a strategy for how to rein this back in and how to eat the foods that are most healthy for you, what he calls the being sane about the way that you eat. And so one of those tips is just to make sure that you're getting clean protein. I mean, clean protein is such a great swap for the sugar. You'll be much better served in that window between 2 and 4 p.m. when you're jonesing for your sugar rush or your milk chocolate, and instead you have an ounce of almonds together with a full glass of filtered water. Or maybe you have a little leftover salmon, wild-caught salmon from the day before, just to help stabilize your blood sugar. It's one of the best things you can do for keeping your blood sugar in that narrow range where we want you to be operating.
I was actually hanging with you and our good buddy Abel James not too long ago, and then that weekend we were with Abel and we went to a place where he couldn't eat anything, and I was considering doing a cheat day or not and trying to figure it out, and he said, I'll just eat a stick of butter later. I go, dude, what are you, crazy? What are you, a stick of butter? And he goes, yeah. And so he starts showing me how, this big chunk of butter they just put in his mouth, and it was only like 200 calories, and the satiety that you get from that. guys, satiety means you're full. You don't need more. You're satiated, right? The satiety you get from eating that much butter, you're done, man. Like, you don't need any more food, because that the body is saying, yes, I love this. You're giving me grass-fed, healthy butter, and it's a good quality, good source of fat, and that's a really good swap as well.
Hey, I love that point. I wish that we had a video camera on you and Abel digging into the butter. You know, the idea is that when your body's craving sugar, you may misinterpret it that. You may actually be wanting to reach for the protein or for the fat, because you're going to get way more satiety, as you just said. You're going to feel more contented when you get those, rather than the, you know, almost the toxic mimic, which is sugar. So another point that I think is important is, if you're really craving chocolate, and this is especially true for the women out there, instead of the milk chocolate, I want you to reach for the dark chocolate. And I'm talking here about 85% plus cacao, because that's going to get you all those antioxidants that are in the dark chocolate without so much sugar. Now, if you can bump it up even higher to 90% or more, you're right there with me, and that's what I want you to be doing.
Chocolate is a beautiful thing. You don't need to interlace it with too much dairy and too much sugar to really ruin it. If you could get your taste buds tuned so you don't need that much sweet, the chocolate itself is just delightful. It's delightful. Okay, one more swap, you guys. Lots and lots of good quality, organically grown vegetables. These are the carbs that you should be eating, but these are the carbs that aren't coming with the kind of accelerated stack them on calorie packages, right? It's the sugar we've developed, we've refined and refined and refined so that we can basically increase the sweet, so we can increase the load. Whereas if you go back into nature, vegetables were how we got most of those carbohydrates, and it was a lot of water and a lot of fiber. So you go through that. I mean, you know, how much celery can you eat? Right? You eat a couple of stalks, you're done, you know, and so if you start increasing your vegetable load, it's not only great for your digestive tract, giving you the phytonutrients and all things that you need to kind of support your detoxification pathways and help your body do what it does, it also fills you up, and you don't need that. Now, one thing I really need to talk about real quick is people who need sweets after a meal. Insulin resistance, and this is something I know you talk about all the time, but this is something I've also had challenges with in my life, you know, getting these big Persian dinners and all this, like, you know, rice and all the stuff that mama would stack on, and then afterwards, like, you craved sweet. So here's another piece of this, you guys, and I can't talk about blood sugar without talking about insulin resistance, because I personally have suffered from it, you know, growing up with, you know, good Middle Eastern cooking and my mom making a bunch of Persian food, and I just always craved sweets after meals. And then when I started looking at my blood chem and looking at my cortisol levels and realizing that I had become insulin resistant in a lot of ways, that's when I started being able to change it and not unconsciously reaching for the sweet. But if you're needing a sweet after a big meal, chances are that you've been kind of off on this blood sugar roller coaster for a while, and there's plenty of ways to kind of come back, you guys. You know, there's certain you know, herbal formulas that I like. You know, I like using holy basil and a few other things for cortisol, and I know you talk about this all the time, but you know, there's a way out. You know, and the short story is, if you swap out your lean proteins, as Dr. Sarah suggested, and the good quality fats, as we talked about, and some good carbohydrates alone, that'll start balancing out the insulin resistance. And then from there, yeah, there's other types of intervention, but you know, it all starts with what goes in your mouth every day.
Such a good point. And I love the point about the vegetables that you made, Pedram, because when you crowd out, you know, that problem with the insulin resistance, when you crowd out the sugar by bringing in more nutrient-dense foods, it just makes your life so much easier. And the cool part here is that you can turn this ship around. You can turn around insulin resistance and the blood sugar roller coaster in 72 hours, which is just like the coolest message ever. So a couple of my favorite supplements, I'll just rattle through a few of them. I love chromium. I love cinnamon, but we're not talking about the cinnamon that's in your spice drawer. We're talking about pharmaceutical grade cinnamon, which is a little harder to get, not too hard. I also really love omega-3s, really important insulin sensitizer. So the list is pretty long. Those are a few of my favorites. And I feel like we've gotten through some amazing information today. We started with Oreos as being, you know, the new form of crack, and now we've got all these tips for what people can do to crowd out the sugar.
Guys, you never know what you're going to get with us, and we're not trying to like toot our own horns, but we'll just, you know, we're here to hang out and help and kind of talk about relevant subjects. So, you know, wherever you're seeing this too, if you have questions, and just engage us and tell us, hey, listen, I'm having a problem with this, and we'll be able to, you know, get you onto a show and kind of get your answers to you and figure out, you know, where we can help you. Dr. Sarah Gottfried.md.com. She's got a lot of great resources. I know we got a lot of resources at well.org. We're here to help you guys. And so as these stories and these studies keep coming out, we're going to jump on and really start to interpret them for you. You know, I'm the Eastern herbal, esoteric, you know, background guy, and Sarah, you know, is the super Harvard trained brainiac, MIT, you know, bioengineer. And we're here to hang out. We're here to talk about them somewhere in the middle. We're here to kind of help dissect them in a way that's digestible, because if it's not digestible, it's not usable, then what's the point? You know, you're not here to read a medical journal. You're here to just kind of get what you need to get and go back to your life because you're busy living it.
That's right, and we want to keep you upgrading your life. So we want to take this information that's coming out and really make it relevant for you so that it just sparks you to a whole new level. That is what we're doing here in The Bridge.
Love it. Till next week.
Till next week. Bye, everybody. Bye, Pedram.
Bye.